In ancient Greek tragedy, the protagonist's fatal flaw is usually hubris, an extreme, arrogant pride. Trailing closely behind it is Nemesis, the ruin that follows. Today, we colloquially call this extreme grandiosity a God complex. Society tends to look at individuals who demand absolute devotion and assume they are operating from a position of supreme power. But psychologically, this behavior acts as a defense mechanism. It is an impenetrable armor built to shield a highly fragile ego from the terror of vulnerability. While a superiority complex drives someone to compete and boast to hide their insecurities, a God complex operates on a different plane. These individuals genuinely believe they exist entirely outside the human spectrum of error. By demanding to be recognized as infallible deities, they are insulating themselves from the terrifying reality of their own human limitations. When this delusion infects geopolitical structures, the human cost is measured in millions. The autocrats of the early 20th century constructed their regimes around the demand for absolute subjugation. They used their control over language and law to construct artificial realities. Entire societies were organized to serve the singular purpose of validating one leader's infallibility, systematically erasing the autonomy of their citizens. Political philosopher Hannah Arendt observed that genuine political power is never static, and it is never the property of a single individual. She argued true power is generated only when people act in concert, relying on a network of debate and mutual consent. But the God complex rejects this. Believing they are uniquely omnipotent, they dismantle the pluralistic network, substituting real power with isolated violence and coercion. By silencing every dissenting voice, the leader severs their connection to the real world. They may command an army through fear, but they find themselves trapped in a void of their own making, isolated, paranoid, and incapable of the genuine cooperation required to sustain a state. This pathology also surfaces in the boardroom. In professional environments, it often appears as Hubris Syndrome, an acquired condition where power literally intoxicates a leader. We see this acutely in Silicon Valley. The immense wealth and global reach of the technology sector have birthed an era of tech saviorism. Developers begin to view their code as an achievement that elevates them to demigods, burdened with rescuing a humanity they view as helpless. Figures like Steve Jobs operated within a famous reality distortion field. This absolute self-belief allowed them to openly dismiss structural constraints, market warnings, and criticism as if they were suggestions for a different species. Today, that same hubris poses a threat in the development of artificial intelligence. Overconfident creators, convinced of their own superior intellect, are deploying massive systems while willfully ignoring established ethical guardrails. The tech industry's drive to disrupt existing social structures is often a mask for a hyper-capitalist drive for domination. To these leaders, regulatory bodies are not authorities, they are obstacles to be bypassed. This fixation on individual brilliance creates a dangerous environment where the creator's ego takes precedence over the public's safety, their fundamental privacy, and long-term agency. A similar dynamic takes root in the medical profession. Physicians are uniquely positioned between life and death. Making those daily, high-stakes decisions can easily foster the illusion of personal infallibility. Public perception often reinforces this by viewing physicians as godlike thinkers, highly skilled at planning and control, but somehow immune to common human vulnerabilities like fear, exhaustion, or grief. When hospitals treat this stoicism as a requirement for the job, it creates a vacuum where arrogance is allowed to flourish unchecked. When medical hubris goes unchecked, the physical harm is catastrophic. British surgeon Ian Paterson operated in fierce isolation and actively refused peer review. His absolute certainty in his own methods led him to perform entirely unnecessary surgeries on hundreds of healthy patients. Surgery requires an extreme level of confidence just to execute the job, but when that confidence metastasizes into a complete inability to accept human error, the healer is weaponized against the patient. Eventually, the illusion shatters. The Nemesis phase arrives because the hubristic leader has surrounded themselves with sycophants. They systematically destroy their own critical feedback loops until they lose contact with the world around them. Neutralizing this requires strict organizational guardrails. The archaic model of the lone, heroic executive has to be replaced with distributed, team-based accountability. Organizations must enforce mandatory, anonymous 360-degree feedback systems that leaders cannot bypass. This structural friction forces the executive to confront the reality of their own fallibility. Clinicians use modalities like Schema Therapy to bypass the initial outbursts of narcissistic rage. They work to dismantle the psychological armor, eventually reaching the vulnerable child mode that the patient has spent a lifetime trying to hide. Real power, and the psychological health required to wield it, relies on the difficult, grounding acceptance of our own fallibility and the reality of our interdependence.